Arndtfield and Swart text. The lecture, of course, comes from chapter 7. We're going to talk about the depths of despair, radicalization, terrorism, and new media. So it's about terrorism primarily. Excuse me. Okay, well, let's go ahead and get started. There we go. Terrorist activities are conducted on the surface web, the deep web, and dark web, subsets of the internet for these purposes. I didn't even realize that the, the vast majority of the internet was stuff that I couldn't get to, because all I ever do is deal with the surface web. I don't deal with the deep web or the dark web. It's estimated that less than 1% of the content of the web can be found on the surface web, where it can be indexed by search engines such as Google, Yahoo, and Bing. The deep web is a subset of the internet that is not indexed by the search engines, but with an address, anyone can visit these directly. And I've never had an address, thank goodness. An estimated 90% of content reside at this level. And that's what it looks like. Here's Google, way up here. Wikipedia, the cloud, Bing. The deep web contains about 500 times more information than the commonly defined World Wide Web or surface web. The deep web is used for online activities that users want or need to keep from public view, or which are otherwise illegal activities that include but are not limited to illicit trade and pornography and special interest collaborations or negotiations. These sites are accessible by personal and vouched sharing of the information necessary to make use of their services. Their content and locations are not visible to normal search engines and directories, but anyone with a URL link and or login access can visit these pages without any special browser or software that enables anonymous communication, such as Tor, T-O-R. Terrorists hardly use the dark net, as they find it too restrictive and prefer to use the surface web to reach a wider audience. Also, anonymizing networks result in a slow and unstable connection, which limits its usefulness to terrorist groups to activities where anonymity is critical, such as communicating plans, arranging meetings, and hiding product and financial exchanges. Terrorist use and presence on the internet is very dynamic, as different groups communicate with their different target audiences, their own affiliates and leadership base, current and potential supporters, international influencers, for example, potential donors and mainstream media, and enemies using mostly the surface web, in particular social media, bar for the most sensitive publications, communications, and business. A sample of 20,000 ISIS supporter accounts revealed that most followers were located in Syria and Iraq. Almost 1/5 primarily used English on Twitter, and these accounts had a follower number significantly larger than the average Twitter user and were considerably more active. Although suspending the most active accounts with high follower numbers helped to limit the reach and the scope of the Islamic State, isolating the Islamic State or ISIS followers that can lead to speedier radicalization and hindering natural social dynamics that can prevent radicalization. In the 11th century, a group called the Assassins in the Middle East killed governors and political and military leaders to create alliances or as an act of retribution. Subsequent terrorist waves or periods have lasted about 3 or 4 decades, after which they would gradually fade out. The 4 modern waves are as follows: the anarchist movement in the 1880s, the anti-colonial movement in 1920s, the New Left or the Red Communist movement in the 1960s, and religious terror at 1979 until today. The first wave started in the 1880s in Russia, after which it spread to other parts of Europe, the Americas, and Asia. Promoting a strategy of using new technologies and communication tools, such as telegraph and newspapers, to seek liberation and self government, the most notorious organization of that era was the Narodnaya Volya, or the People's Will, best known for the assassination of Tsar Alexander II of Russia in 1881. The wave lasted until the early 1900s with other well known victims. Empress Elizabeth of Austria, who was assassinated in Switzerland in 1898, Italy's King Umberto on Monzoa in 1900, and the United States President McKinley in Buffalo, New York in 1901. And this is the assassination of McKinley. One of the offshoots of the assassination of McKinley was that they invented air conditioning because it was so hot in his hospital room. They wanted a way to that they could cool the air, and they invented air conditioning. Starting in the 1920s, it was primarily a struggle for self-determination, for independence, and for liberating certain parts of the world from colonial occupiers, mainly the British and the French rule. The tactics that these groups used were different from the previous wave in that they used guerrilla tactics where small mobile groups engaged and disengaged in rapid succession, hit-and-run tactics against a larger force. Instead of terrorists, these individuals now call themselves freedom fighters. And this is a picture of the freedom fighters of the Philippines. The United States, of course, took over the Philippines from the Spanish in the Spanish-American War. So the United States took over in right around the turn of the 20th century. And the Filipinos were not that happy being controlled now suddenly by the Americans. So there were a lot of freedom fighters coming out of the Philippines. Interestingly, when President Reagan decided that he liked the idea, he didn't like Nicaragua going Marxist. So he decided that he would back a group of individuals called the Contras right out in Honduras. They were fighting against the Nicaraguan government, and he always referred to them as freedom fighters. If you like them, you call them freedom fighters. If you don't like them, you call them terrorists. One of the most well-known organizations of this wave, the anti-colonial wave, is the Irish Republican Army, or the IRA, who from the 1920s on was fighting for a free, independent, and united Irish state. Also part of the second wave is the Front de Libération Nationale, the FLN, a group of Algerians who were fighting French rule in the 1950s for an independent Algeria. Another example is the Irgun, a militant Zionist group that was fighting the British authorities who were governing in Mandate Palestine, the territories now established as Israel and Palestine. The Front de Libération du Québec in Canada, founded in 1963, represented perhaps the latest iteration of this second wave of anti-colonialism. What can we also say? There is an FLN that in Puerto Rico, trying to liberate Puerto Rico from the United States. Puerto Rico is a territory of the United States, and from time to time they have voted whether they want to be a state, whether they want to be an independent nation, or whether they want to remain a territory. This is something that happens about every 20 years. The Puerto Rican people on Puerto Rico will vote as to how they want to be, and usually, I mean, it's up to this point. It's turned out that they like being a territory. They don't have to pay taxes. American taxes. They don't really have a representative in Congress, but I don't know. If they became a nation of their own, then they'd have to start taxing their people. That's not a very good idea. They don't really like that idea very much. Anyway, the FLN is also the organization that is trying to liberate the Puerto Rico. I have a story about that, but I don't think I'm going to tell it. The third wave of terrorism is what became known as the New Left Wave, or an extreme left terrorism, of which the Red Brigades, the Rote Army Fraction in Germany, the Weather Underground in the United States, and other groups that started in the 1960s. They used urban guerrilla tactics and operated in the context of the Cold War. The international terrorism of this era is additionally associated with the Palestinian liberation struggle, in particular activities of the Palestine Liberation Organization, or the PLO. Their modus operandi was again different from previous periods, as they frequently engaged in hostage taking and aircraft hijacking. This is a picture of USAFE headquarters in Ramstein, Germany. I was stationed in Ramstein, Germany when this happened. So I was intimately involved with the Red Army faction. The other thing about the Red Army faction, that's Red Army fraction means the same thing. Anyway, we used to see stars on buildings when we were living in Zweibrücken, and I was working at Ramstein, and we would see these stars on buildings from time to time with an RAF in the middle of it. The gun wasn't there, of course. The group that blew up USAFE headquarters was a group called the Beider Meinhof Gang. She was Meinhof and he was Beider, Baader. Anyway, there were two of them. It was a man and a woman, and they brought these people together, and they're the ones that blew up USAFE headquarters. Really kind of fascinating. I was one of the first medics on the scene, and there was nobody there. was actually there was actually only two people in the building at the time. It moved the building off its foundation, which was a little interesting. Um, the dental clinic, if you're looking at this picture, the dental clinic this is taken from the dental clinic actually. The dental clinic blew out all the windows in the dental clinic, and that was most of the injuries were in there. There were two people in the building. One guy had a head injury, and the other guy had a arterial leg injury that we had to stop the bleeding. Really kind of interesting. Strangely enough, I got into trouble because I started treating the guy with the leg injury, and they hadn't cleared the building yet. Here I was trying to help this guy. Anyway, I got into trouble. Has this building been cleared? You know, that kind of a thing. Anyway, not important. Anyway, so I came in contact with this. I also came in contact with the FLN, as I said before. Um, what's the story? Okay. They were having problems. We had a lot of Puerto Ricans in the military at the time, and we were having trouble with different organizations, and different things were taking place that we couldn't figure out. You know, you couldn't stick all these things together. It was really difficult because this was happening here and something else was happening someplace else. Okay, so the day that they blew up, there was a Air Force base on Puerto Rico. It was a National Guard base, and the base was blown up one day. Um, they blew up a bunch of planes. It was the FLN that did it. On the same day, there was a airplane crash in Germany at Ramstein, and the same time there was an airplane. Two planes crashed together at Wiesbaden. Anyway, all this happened at the same time, and nobody ever put this stuff together. Yeah. Anyway, the airplane crash at Ramstein had to do with the FLN as well, and I always suspected that probably the other airplane crash had to do with the FLN too. But of course, nobody ever stuck any of these things together, and nothing ever happened after that. Anyway, not important, not important stuff. This is all water under the bridge. The FLN doesn't really exist anymore in Puerto Rico. Red Army faction, all of this communist stuff is gone. Um, the communists have lost power, of course. And now the terrorists that we have to worry about are the religious terrorists. And this is the fourth wave. The fourth and last wave is called the religious terror wave, that is thought to have begun in 1979, the year of the Islamic Revolution in Iran, the Soviet expansion of Afghanistan, and the storming and occupation of the Grand Mosque in Mecca. And that's what this is a picture of. This is the way that we all currently are dealing with with Al Qaeda and with ISIS. Leaders and followers. The leaders of large structured terrorist organizations are not much different in many aspects from business CEOs or crime bosses, with mostly, but not always, criminogenic and ideological differences. The reality is that, much like what is found in other positions of power, terrorist leaders must be able to strategically, tactically, and operationally guide their organizations to achieve their vision and mission, and ultimately survive long enough to do so. For that, they must inspire and effectively manage followers and employees, oversee that the best people are recruited and trained for each job, select an operational plan that best fits their objectives and resources, know their enemy and their capabilities, guide the marketing and public relations message, and supervise income and expenditure. These tasks require a wide range of capabilities and personality features to support them. In the 1970s, the FBI conducted a study of sex offenders and serial killers that led to the organized-disorganized psychological profiling dichotomy. And this is, if you ever watched any of those profiling shows, they'll talk about organized criminals and disorganized criminals. Organized offenders planned their actions, took precautions and evasive measures to prevent being caught, and were typically better educated with more stable home and work lives than their disorganized counterparts, who did not appear to do much planning and were driven by spur-of-the-moment reactions and compulsions with a lack of ability to regulate their emotions and behavior. Most terrorist leaders can be classified as organized offenders, better educated and more privileged than their peers, with families, social skills, and community standing, primarily because their responsibilities and activities as an effective ideological and operational leader demand these qualities. Yet they have psychopathic tendencies, such as a tendency to take risks and exploit people. They are unemotional and callous. They objectify the enemy, and they have a lack of remorse and insight into the consequences of their actions. Their passion is their belief system, which they follow fervently and unyieldingly, and they expect others to do the same, using coercion, threats, and violence to ensure that their will is followed. Finally, given the background and context of most political struggles and armed conflicts, many people exposed to these conditions, especially from a young age, come from a strained family unit, have experience of domestic or community violence, and have a high likelihood of suffering from PTSD symptoms. So now we're going to talk about lone wolves. These are people that blow up or attack, just not organized, not part of a group. Lone wolf terrorists have been defined as people who, A, operate individually, B, do not belong to an organized terrorist group or network, and C, whose modus operandi are conceived and directed by the individual without any direct outside command or hierarchy. 5 recent trends in lone wolf terrorism. 1, increased number of countries targeted by lone wolf terrorists. 2, increased number of fatalities and injuries caused by lone wolves. 3, increased success rate of the United States law enforcement to apprehend lone wolves before they can carry out their attacks. 4, high prevalence and success rate of loners. And 5, increased targeting of military personnel. There are four different types of lone wolves. The first is the loner. These individuals use the cover, usually a false flag, of extreme ideology to plan and carry out an act of terrorism. They do not appear to have any connection with specific extremist individuals or networks other than passive consumption of material on the internet. Typically, psychological or social issues underlie their motivations rather than ideology or command and control. The second type is the lone wolf. The first was a loner, the second is a lone wolf. Such an individual appears to operate alone and with no firm evidence of command and control, but has some level of contacts with active extremists, often in cyberspace, for example, in chat rooms, via emails, and on social media. They are more aligned to known extremist networks from an ideological standpoint than structured operations. The lone wolf pack is another type. Instead of a single individual who radicalizes online, such a group becomes ideologically motivated together. Their beliefs become progressively intense, fueled by the kinship, friendship, and a shared sense of discipline that are common with the other members. They have not established contact with active extremists, or may have, but not for furthering immediate operational goals. There are no specific command and control features evident, and they resemble more of a small group of like-minded individuals than a terror cell. The lone attacker, these individuals operate alone but demonstrate clear control and command links with a terrorist group. They have contact with active extremists and are involved in cyber and physical networks where they spread their narrative and receive operational support such as weapons or explosive devices. Two social psychology phenomena that appear to be associated with the psychology of lone terror acts are strong reciprocity, or the evolutionary basis for human willingness to punish moral transgressors, even when the transgression is against someone else, and group identification, which involves self-sacrifice for welfare of others, even when the sense of need of belonging is an aspiration and not actualized. And of course, this is a moral. She's attacking her for being a moral transgressor. I'm not sure what she did, of course. In a sample of 41 school attackers, 81% had a grievance, 98% experienced an unfreezing shortly before the event, 24% displayed the need for status and risk-seeking, 63% had a history of weapons use, and 44% had a history of interest in violence. These statistics showed similarity in a sample of 83 lone attackers, 67% with a personal grievance, nearly 50% with an experience of unfreezing, 38% desiring status and risk-seeking, 71% with prior weapons use, and 59% showing an interest in violence before. Lone wolves rarely radicalize and function in complete isolation. Most are influenced deliberately or otherwise by others, while some are radicalized, taught, trained, and directed as part of a targeted and structured apparatus. Online platforms, most notably social media, play a vital enabling role, supporting, amplifying, and often speeding up the radicalization processes through access to extremist narratives, like-minded people and facilitators, and functional, private, and secure networks and applications. The 7 stages adapted to an extremist radicalization process are in typical linear order, although each phase influences the others. Number 1 is context. Context is the culture, historical, political, social, and economic environment in which the individual finds themselves that forms risk or protective factors for conversion. Crisis is number 2. It is an event or state that causes an unpleasant personal disequilibrium, usually a loss, displacement, or social or financial change. Number three is quest, is the process of seeking to restore the equilibrium that previously existed, typically before the crisis. Number four is encounter, refers to the first contact between the individual and proponent of supply information about potential solution or solutions. Number five is interaction, is the continued exchange of information and the introduction of more champions of the idea or enablers of the solution. Number six is commitment, involves a decision and promise by the individual to show his or her acceptance of the solution and solidifying his or her belief and emotional association. Number seven is consequences, are the outcome of the actions made because of the belief, which are constantly evaluated and looped back to reassess the environment, the quest, and commitment in particular. From 2013 to 2018, of the 183 individuals charged or killed in the United States because of terrorist actions in this period, 131, or 71.5%, maintained a social media profile with jihadist material or utilized encryption for plotting. These numbers are, in all accounts, significantly different from those in the previous 5-year period, 2008 to 2012, when only 38, 31.7% of terrorists of 120 showed signs of online radicalization. The same study found that nearly one-third, 30%, of those convicted of or killed in jihadist terror attacks since 9/11 were Muslim converts and 84% citizens and permanent residents of the U.S. Thus, the internet enables and likely speeds up the radicalization process through sheer availability of information and networking potential in a secure, anonymous environment. A study by the RAND Corporation identified 5 themes common in online radicalization processes grouped into facilitative and reinforcing mechanisms. Number 1, the internet creates more opportunities to become radicalized. Number 2, the internet acts as an echo chamber. Number 3, the internet accelerates the process of radicalization. Number 4, the internet allows radicalization to occur without physical contact. And number 5, the internet increases opportunities for self-radicalization. Terrorist organizations, especially those with international aspirations, rely on the internet to ensnare new recruits with radical ideas and propaganda by targeting susceptible minds who have a need to belong somewhere and believe that having a cause will improve their situation. In addition to increasing the visibility of terrorist groups and their causes, the internet extends their geographical reach to all corners of the world in an extremely cost-effective way, while keeping physical exposure to a minimum. The recruitment effort utilizes the interactive communication capabilities of online media and applications to support radicalization strategies by grooming and pulling at-risk individuals into its fray, perhaps not dissimilar from pedophiles grooming their victims, preparing them to be willing and committed to act as they desire. Now, one of the things that we need to remember is that there are not just international terrorists, there are not just religious terrorists, but there are domestic terrorists. And that's one of the things that happened on January 6th. These people were all pulled together, and they came together at the Capitol building. And a lot of them were recruited from using the internet. It appears that deceptive techniques are increasingly utilized to control a narrative in a new form of cyber warfare. Recently, troll farms and sock puppets increasingly came under the spotlight, with allegations that governments, the mainstream media, online activists, and terrorist organizations are involved in these tactics. A sock puppet refers to the use of a false or misleading online identity for deception. These identities are created on social media and other online communities to praise, defend, support, or attack an opinion, perspective, person, or organization, to manipulate public opinion, plant and perpetuate false information, or to circumvent the suspension or ban of another account from a website. In addition to the use of sock puppets to promote legitimate businesses and products, manipulate book and film reviews, and steer blog commentary, governments and terrorist groups are increasingly accused of using sock puppets en masse to ensure traction of their message. And of course, this has recently happened with some of the attacks on the politicians in the United States, some of the gubernatorial races, and some of the senatorial races around the country. All of a sudden, they have these really strange attacks, these where they're putting messages online that are completely false, really kind of irritating. That they could lie like that and not have to take these things down. What's happening is they are sock puppets. They are people are putting these things up, and potentially it's going to change the race. It's going to change the political climate in the United States. Are all of these people from the United States? Potentially they're not. We know that in the 2016 election, there were sock puppets and troll farms that were attempting to control the narrative between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. Whoops. Troll farms, also known as web brigades, consist of people who are employed and organized into teams of commentators to participate on social media, internet blogs, forums, and news discussions to distort opinions and debates. Internet users are convinced by these comments left by web brigades, but at least seeds of distrust are placed in the conversations. Rather than allowing for frank discussions, the vision of the social media pioneers, these statements are often divisive or deflective, thereby undermining the internet as a source of reliable information and open discourse. Many Western countries also suffer from a systematic multicultural doctrine that lacks effective assimilation. Multiculturalism is a political philosophy that is often juxtaposed with other settlement policies, including social integration and cultural assimilation. Without embroiling into a lengthy political argument, different combinations of these approaches can have divergent outcomes on societal stability and psychopathology of communities, which influence the risk of individual and collective radicalization and violent extremism. Why am I showing you a picture of the Eiffel Tower? The reason is because this is a problem that they have in France, this is a problem that they have in Germany, and this is certainly a problem they have in England. Multiculturalism without assimilation, without people accepting the culture, will create a situation where there is tension between the dominant culture and the minority culture, the subordinate culture. Assimilation has to do with what happened in the United States and Canada and Australia, because there were so many immigrants coming in, because they were working on getting these people to accept their way of government, their way of life. Because of that their educational system supported the assimilation of these select individuals. This happened in the United States. Multiculturalism is okay. It's working in the United States. You can be Hispanic. You can be an Arab American. You can be any of a myriad of groups, and you will still be accepted in the United States. Same way in Canada. Same way in the same way in Australia. But France, Germany, and England are not. They have not had huge influxes of immigrants at any one time, and so they haven't had to attempt to educate these individuals into accepting their way of life. And because of that, and that's what they're talking about here, the multiculturalism without assimilation, because of that, they have ghettoized, or they have isolated these populations. And of course, that has caused several terrorist attacks in those countries. Belgium is another country that has that problem. And that is the end of the lecture. So I'll talk to you guys next week. Next week, we're going to start on gaming. I don't have a textbook for gaming, and you guys, therefore, you guys don't have a textbook. But we'll see what happens. I've got 3 more weeks of lectures, so I have to figure out 3 more groups of see what I'm going to do. Anyway, I'll talk to you guys next week.